And so it's my honor to introduce Lynn Cooper-Smith from our Lifelong Learning Committee.
I don't want to.
Good morning. My name is Lynn Cooper-Smith. I'm a member of the Lifelong Learning Committee and will be your host for this morning's program. I do have warm regards from Moshe Margolin, who is the chair of the committee and has been so sick these last couple of weeks that he just couldn't be here. Is that better? Moshe is on the mend, I think, hope, but he's really heartbroken that he couldn't be here because he knows our speaker for decades now and was so hoping to be able to join us. But in any case, we're glad you're here. Before we get into the introductions, I would like to just mention that this is the first program that we've done in coordination with our religious school schedule, so that we, in hopes that we are timing this so that it's convenient for parents to be able to join us. And I think we've had some success with this, and we look forward to building on this with future programs. So again, we're so glad that you're here. Whether you're here in person or you're here on Zoom, welcome. And a special welcome not only to our speaker, who I will introduce in a moment, but to his mother, Myra Breakstone, and his wife, Gabriella Klaber. Delighted to have you both. And another special welcome to two other very special guests, Yonatan Lucado and Isa Wanini. They are from Uganda. I hope you've had a chance to meet. Guys, where are you? Oh, right in the front row. I hope you've had a chance to meet them. They are from Uganda, but now living with us in Princeton. So we are honored to have all of you here at the Jewish Center. Before I introduce our guest scholar, I would like to go over some ground rules for the program really quickly. Dr. Breakstone will be responding to your questions periodically during and immediately following his presentation. If you are participating on Zoom, please use the chat function to pose your questions. If you are here in person, please raise your hand and wait until you can be recognized. We do have limited time and anticipate that we will not be able to answer all your questions, but we'll certainly do our best. And to avoid unintended distractions, the Zoom audience will be muted throughout this morning's program. Again, please use the chat function to pose your questions. I'd like to take a quick opportunity to thank Suzanne Esterman, who is serving as our Zoom master this morning, and special thanks to Sharon Diamondstein and the Religious School for this morning's refreshments. And now I am pleased to introduce Dr. David Breakstone, our guest scholar, for this first lifelong learning intergenerational program. Dr. Breakstone recently completed a term as deputy chairman of the executive of the Jewish Agency in Israel, during which he worked closely with small Jewish communities around the world, including the Abayudaya of Uganda, with whom he has been involved for many years. He previously served as vice chairman of the World Zionist Organization and as a member of the executives of WZO, Keren Kameth Yisrael with JNF, and Keren Hayesod. I'm probably mangling those words badly, my apologies. Throughout his career, he has held leadership positions in several educational projects. Presently, he serves as the executive director of the Navan Center for a Shared Society and is a member of the directorates of Yad Vashem, the Ethiopian National Project, the Schechter Institute, Kulanu, and Akba. And that's just a fraction of the bio that we could be sharing with you this morning. David, who made Aliyah from the United States in 1974, earned his doctorate from the Hebrew University. And I have a request from the rabbi to mention that Dr. Breakstone was her principal. Where was it? In high school or in high school?
In Israel.
In Israel, yes. So we have deep connections here. David, it's all yours.
Thank you. Okay, it really is a pleasure for me to be here this morning. You mentioned a couple of the people. Whoops, don't take the microphone with you. Indeed, Rabbi Mero was a student back in 1985, was it? A long time ago. You mentioned Jonathan and Esau. Actually, my wife and I had the pleasure of hosting them in our backyard when they were in Israel. If you look carefully during the presentation, you may actually see pictures of them. Moshe Margolin was mentioned. Again, he was another warm connection here. And I discovered another one this morning, Jane LaGrange, who we went to high school together in Great Neck, New York. So I'm feeling at home. And I appreciate your mentioning my mother and my wife and Yonatan and Esau. I think you did that just to keep me on my toes. Undoubtedly, my wife and mother will critique this presentation afterwards. Yonatan and Esau will make corrections along the way. They're the ones who really know the community, but I'll do the best I can under the circumstances. If we can get this. Why do we not have the tech crew? We were all set up. I guess the bagels did us in. Let's see what oh, or maybe plug it in. That would be a good idea. TV automatically cut off. That's only supposed to happen after I speak for an hour. Excellent. Okay. The video is going to only come out from here. The video is only going to come out from.
I'll come through that sound.
Okay.
You'll hear it.
I'll hear it. Okay, we'll put it up on the top. Okay, as was mentioned, I indeed recently completed a term as the deputy chair of the Jewish Agency Executive. I often there called myself the minister of the cracks. It seemed that all the populations that were falling through the cracks that other people weren't taking care of somehow came across my desk. I was very enthusiastic to get those requests from all sorts of Jewish communities around the world who were looking to connect to the state of Israel, looking for recognition, looking to participate in programs coming on Aliyah. The Abayudaya community played a major part in that process. I was very involved with them on many different levels. And I'm going to give you an overview of that community today. But I want to start to make sure that you understand we're talking about real people. Again, with Yonatan and Esau here, that makes it much easier. Real people with real faces and real names, and also with real stories. And I want to start out by sharing a bit of some of the more problematic stories that I was dealing with at the Jewish Agency and that others continue to deal with today. December 18th, 2017, Yehuda Kimani, a 31-year-old leader of a nascent Jewish community in Kenya affiliated with the Abayudaya, arrives in Israel with a valid tourist visa, planning on studying for 3 weeks at the conservative yeshiva in Jerusalem. He arrives at the airport. He's not allowed in. He's taken to a holding room. He's questioned as to what his motives are and his plans for being here. He tells them that he's planning on spending these 3 weeks at the conservative yeshiva studying. And they tell him two things. One, if you're planning on studying, you needed a student visa, not a tourist visa, which is not the case. And it was very clear when he applied for his visa what he was doing. And the other thing was that he was told is if you want to study in a yeshiva, you have to be Jewish. Only Jews study in yeshiva and you're not Jewish. He ended up being held overnight, not even allowed to make a phone call, and was deported back to Kenya the next morning. The next one, Yonatan Lally. A few years later, this is July 7th, 2019. I'm in Uganda for the centennial celebration of the Abayudaya community. I get a frantic email one morning telling me that 2 students in Uganda who were invited to participate in an international Jewish young leadership mission to Israel from around the world had not been issued their visas and were just told that they were not going to be getting their visas. Yonatan was one of them. There was no real explanation as to why those visas were not being issued. As I said, somebody contacted me from Israel. I contacted the Israeli ambassador in Nairobi. They're the ones that take care of that. We have no ambassador in Uganda. I make the case for them. I explain that the person says, well, the community is not recognized. I say, what does being recognized have to do with anything? Anybody can get a tourist visa. He's been accepted into a program. But at this point, he was refused. Yosef Kabita. Back in 2016, he had applied to participate in a Masa program. You're familiar with the Masa long-term programs in Israel, half-year or 10-month programs that Jewish students from around the world participate in. You can imagine as well that he was not initially given that visa, but eventually we managed to finagle our way through the bureaucracy, and he was allowed to participate. He fell in love with the country and decided during the time that he was studying there that he wanted to make Aliyah. He filled out an application to make Aliyah, went off to Kibbutz Keturah. Some of you may be familiar with it, down near Eilat, a community that's very open to and good connections with the conservative movement. He started volunteering there, waiting for his Aliyah request to be approved. Guess what? It wasn't. Not only was it not approved, but when we pressed the case, he was told that it wasn't approved, it's not going to be approved. And in fact, if he doesn't leave the country, he's overstayed the other visa that he has. Now that his Aliyah visa has been rejected, if he doesn't leave with the country within 30 days, he's going to be evicted. Rabin, over on the bottom left here. He also applied for a year-long study program at the conservative yeshiva. He too was initially not allowed, again, on these crazy grounds that to study in a yeshiva, you have to be Jewish. The state of Israel does not recognize this community, so he was rejected. Rivka, back in Uganda, unlike Yehuda, who applied for Aliyah from Israel, Rivka, a year or so ago, applied to make Aliyah from Uganda. She was continually asked for all sorts of documents proving her Jewishness. Of course, since the state of Israel doesn't recognize her Jewishness, that didn't help very much. And she was told that they're not even going to open up an Aliyah file for her. She was simply rebuffed. More recently, back in September of this year, I get another call regarding Sarah, who wanted to come. She was accepted into a program run by Israel's foreign ministry, a women's empowerment program for people from around the world, not necessarily Jews or only Jews. She was accepted into that program. She was issued a visa. A couple of weeks before the program began, she and all the other participants had to submit their airline tickets in order to be reimbursed for their travel expenses. And she gets a call from the person taking care of this, who tells her from the foreign ministry, who tells her her plane ticket would have left her in Israel for a few weeks after the program ended. She wanted to spend the high holidays in Israel. She was asked why she's extending her visa, why her flight is only going to come take her back to Uganda several weeks after the program ended. She tells them that it's because she wants to stay in Israel for the holidays and do some learning while she's there in a women's seminary. And she's told that if that's really her purpose in coming, the visa was issued to her under false pretenses, and her visa was revoked. That's the beginning of their stories. I'll continue with it as we go on, but I want to put into context a bit about the background to the Abayudaya community and where they came from. And here it's particularly important that Jonathan and Asa will add or correct if there's things along the way that I don't get quite right. But it's interesting and important to know that unlike many other emerging Jewish communities around the world, the Abayudaya make no claim of biblical connections or being a lost tribe or Marranos or Conversos or anything else. They state right from the outset that they are, what happened was that the leader of the community, Sema Kangugu, thank you, fell prey, we could say, to British missionaries who came and converted him and many others to Christianity. He started taking the learning seriously and came to the conclusion quite on his own, this was just over 100 years ago, that the Old Testament was just fine for him without the New Testament, circumcised himself and his sons, and the rest of he was a chieftain, the rest of his tribe, of his following converted as well, and managed to grow the community really about a century ago to about 8,000 or so members. He unfortunately dies of pneumonia. There's a vacuum in the leadership, and there's a significant attrition for the next 10 years of followers. But somebody else a decade later comes fills that vacuum, and they make initial connections with world Jewry, and the community starts growing again. That's for a good several decades without any real problems until Idi Amin comes to power and determines that any Jewish ritual, public observance, and etc. is outlawed entirely and punishable by death. And the community suffers a great deal of violence and persecution during that time. Eventually, Amin is overthrown. Young leaders start what they call the kibbutz movement of trying to revitalize the life of the community. Again, it starts to grow, and the connections with world Jewry really begin in earnest at that point. More and more interest in the Western world develops regarding the community. The community is emboldened by those connections and is once again flourishing. Back in 1999, Kulanu, I don't know how many of you have heard of Kulanu. I'll talk a little bit about it at the end, but Kulanu is an organization dedicated exclusively to working with emerging, developing, isolated Jewish communities around the world of all sorts, of very, very inclusive organization. Kulanu starts investing in the education there and in the infrastructure. as does another organization, B'chol Lashon, that also is dedicated to making the Jewish people a more inclusive and welcoming one, particularly for Jews of color. At that point, one of the leader of the community, Rabbi Gershom, now Rabbi Gershom Sizomu, goes off. He's sponsored to study for the rabbinate. He comes to the United States, spends several years studying, gets ordained through the conservative movement, goes back and really builds up the community once again. His stature and that of the community is heightened when he's elected as a member of the Ugandan parliament, which meant that given the number of Abayudaya in the country of Uganda, an infinitesimally small percentage, his being elected to a member of parliament certainly makes the Jewish community there. It gives it legitimacy and so on. And just a couple of years ago, 2019, the community celebrates its centennial, and I'll show you some pictures of that. So that's a quick overview of where this community came from over the past century. And I'm going to go into different aspects of their life, starting with religion and ritual, which is so central to them. This is a community, a synagogue in one of 9 communities in which the Abayudaya live. They're spread out around different parts of the country. Each one has its own synagogue. They don't obviously all have their own rabbis, but they do have leadership in each of those communities. And it turns out that in each of those 9 villages, while there's a good Jewish community there, the Jews are living as a minority among Muslims and Christians as well. And from what I understand, and you'll correct me if it's not the case, in real harmony with those in the villages who are not Jewish. This is inside one of the synagogues. I note here that they did not put up that Israeli flag because I and others were visiting from Israel. It's there permanently. And it's important to mention that despite the rejections and the evictions and the refusals that I mentioned earlier, this community remains steadfast in its commitment to Israel, its connection to Israel, and its desire to be recognized by and welcomed in Israel as well. Here we are in one of the in the synagogue, in the main synagogue of the community. This was a Thursday morning service during which 2 bat mitzvahs, banot mitzvah, took place. We'll see what happens with the sound now and with the video, which is not. I think we have a Wi-Fi problem. Can we get Wi-Fi? Is there a Wi-Fi connection? It's worth taking. Let me just interrupt this for a second. Which one?
TJ, that connect.
Any questions in the meantime while our tech team is correcting? Yes.
But say who you are first.
Great. Okay, we'll get to the answer is pretty much 100% initially, but you'll see as we move along. Sorry, the question was, I mentioned at the beginning, those whose visa requests were rejected or Aliyah requests were rejected, what percentage of cases of those who apply either to visit or to live fall into that category. The answer is pretty much 100% initially, but with a lot of hard work behind the scenes, we've been very successful in getting people in. So we'll end with that, and I'll continue their stories. Are we?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay.
As far as the current issue that is coming up in Israel with, again, the threat to plurality in the Jewish community, are you seeing any change, or are you expecting more changes or difficulties in the application? Does that make sense?
Yes, the question was with the change in government, what are we expecting? What changes do we anticipate? Are things going to get easier, harder? Are there going to be any change at all? Unfortunately, the answer to that, again, we'll get to it more at the end, is it's clearly going to become ever more difficult. Those who are in positions, who are coming into positions, there's a new czar of Jewish identity in Israel, who is a rabid anti pretty much everything that I imagine most people or everybody here stands for in terms of Judaism and LGBTQ community and so on. So we were hopeful with the last government that there would be greater leniency. That did not happen because there were those in that government who were also not particularly inclusive in their outlook. I will mention that back in 2016, I think it was actually on that slide and I passed over it, but it's important to mention, the Jewish Agency did officially recognize, we're all set? Excellent. Okay.
Want to try to play it?
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
You're good.
Thanks. The Jewish Agency / Sachnut is the organization that processes almost all of the Aliyah applications. Well, for Aliyah applications from around the world, other than the former Soviet Union, that's still the people who apply from the former Soviet Union are processed by another semi-governmental organization. But the Jewish Agency processes those who apply for Aliyah, but it does not grant final approval. The final approval has to be granted by the Ministry of the Interior, which has been in the hands of Shas, the ultra-religious Sephardic party, ultra-Orthodox Sephardic party, for more time than I care to remember. Again, the only exception was these last with the last Lapid government. But then as well, it turned out that it was Ayelet Shaked from the far right wing Yamina party who was granted the Ministry of the Interior, and she was no more forthcoming than Shas had been as well. So we're really in a bind. But let's go back to the positive things that are happening. I want to share what's with the community itself. We'll see if this works now. Oh, sorry. There we go. We'll do that again. No, we won't. Uh-oh, Joel, we seem to have lost the connection. Well, you heard the music there. It was, is Joel here to try to? It does say that we are on. Doesn't like it in full screen for some reason. All right, for the musical numbers, we will leave it on. I don't know why that would be, but Okay. So as I said, this was the morning of a bat mitzvah, and if we see the whole clip, you will see that it's a woman. I don't know when I put it on full screen.
It's about. Did anybody hear this?
Okay. All right. We're stuck either in part screen or. I do want you to hear this, so we'll do it this way. Sound familiar? So this is local music, but they have managed to integrate together. I've got to keep flipping back and forth, it seems, from full view to the other for whatever reason. They do integrate it with other music, which we will try to get for you. I don't know why. Not working again. I'll have to sing for you. In any case, these are the young women who were celebrating their bat mitzvah that Thursday and again on Shabbat, reading from the Torah with expertise and presence and self-confidence that would make any parents proud of their children. Off in the middle of what we consider off in the middle of nowhere in Africa, and really living a full Jewish life. The picture on the left is from the Havdalah service that Motzei Shabbat of the Bat Mitzvah. But as I mentioned, they weren't born Jewish, or they weren't initially Jewish. The whole process of conversion is a very complicated one. The conversion started back in 2002 through the conservative movement. Truth be told, the community had originally reached out to the Orthodox community that shunned them and really would have nothing to do with them. The conservative movement welcomed them with open arms and a lot of encouragement and enthusiasm. And we've been conducting conversions there since 2002. In order to conduct the conversions, it's necessary to convene a Beit Din, a tribunal of 3 rabbis. This is one of them, Rabbi Cheryl Peretz, who many of you may know or have heard of, one of the deans of the Ziegler Rabbinical School. She was there for the centennial as well. And here she's giving an introduction to those who are about to go through a conversion process. This is the Beit Din itself. The gentleman on the left is Rabbi Suzumu, who I mentioned previously. There's a family there down on the bottom slides, people going through being questioned. It's not a group conversion, it's individual conversions or individual families. Neither the conservative movement nor the state of Israel accept a mass conversion where everybody is just herded into the mikveh. So they are very careful to question each family individually. I mentioned the mikveh. It was a little dry when I was there, still in the process of being completed. So what we did was we marched a couple of kilometers down to the river. If you can see the river here and here, you will see, although one is supposed to come out ritually clean, it's not going to be a result of this muddy water that they're immersing themselves in. But indeed, each men separately, of course, the women separately, of course, and immersed themselves in the running water of the muddy river and came out purified. It really was a very emotional thing for us to witness, for all of us who were there. Who are the people who are converting now? You'll see that there are a good number of adults there. I mentioned previously that the Abayudaya live as a minority in these villages together with Muslims and Christians. Many of them, the converts, are women who were not part of the Abayudaya community, that the men of the Abayudaya community married, and it's traditional in Uganda for the woman to take on the religion of the man. I think that that's the case. So it's very often the women who are now going through conversions together with their children. Education, what many of us might take for granted. Down on the bottom left of this is a picture of one of the schools there. Our mission, it says, to produce children with basic educational foundation. Well, we might ask, what's so, that's what schools are for. But in many of the rural communities, that's not to be taken for granted. And indeed, this is a Jewish school. You can see it says the Hadassah Primary School. There in this village, you can see the menorah, Hanukkah, menorah down on the bottom left hand underneath the window there. This is one of the administrators of the school. It's not a high-tech school. You've got the teaching schedule or whatever up there, handwritten out on computers and internet and so on, and are not an integral part of their education, to say the least. And although, as I said, it's a Jewish school, of the 460 students in the school, only 102 of them were Jewish at the time that I was there. But they all, Muslims and Christians as well, learn Hebrew. They have Judaica, Jewish studies. They celebrate the holidays together, and so on. Not uncommon as well in a number of Jewish day schools in the United States today that have also found it necessary to include non-Jews to keep the school solvent. But I will also mention, emblazoned on the side of the school building, the words of Hatikva, the national anthem, of course, and the letters of the Hebrew alphabet running along the side. So even though the Jews are a minority there, the connection to Israel and Jewish studies and so on remains very important. This is inside the school. And again, I would love to be able to see if we can get this to play. Let's see if I can. They're well versed in Israel. Sometimes donors come and they sing Shalom Aleichem to them. These kids, I don't know, it's hard to make out, but they stand up and they're saying, "We love you so much. You are our future." So I'll play that again. So cute little kids, some Jewish, some not. They don't make any real distinction between them. So that's a bit about the education. You're going to be hearing next week, a plug to come back. You're going to be hearing from Jonathan and Asa what their own personal stories and life experiences. They'll be able to fill in the details and what it was like in those schools. Daily life. I have here on the bottom of the slide, how goodly are thy tents, O Jacob, thy dwelling places, O Israel. You look out in this pastoral scene with these hills and mountains in the distance, and one can really feel that. However, as often happens, you get a little closer. These are the living conditions. You can see children, many of them barefoot. The houses, they're incomplete by our standards, but they're complete. That's what they're living in. This picture, this gentleman, do we know, do you know his name, who that is? Doesn't matter. But he's the leader of basically the president of the first synagogue that I showed you. This is his home over on the left. You can see dirt floors, no running water, no electricity, what we would consider to be absolute abject poverty, and think, how can anybody live there? That's the circumstances of the vast majority of the Abayudaya. I mentioned no running water. It's generally the women who often have to walk miles, hours back and forth to fill up these jerry cans. That's it. That's their water supply. I do not recommend that restaurant and hotel on the bottom left-hand corner. I didn't try it, but it's not listed on booking.com, I can promise you. There's a bunches of bananas or plantain on the left-hand side. These are driving along the roads leading to the village. This, I don't know how many of you, and have people visited Africa at all? Okay, a few, so you're familiar with these kinds of scenes and pictures. Sorry, please. Yes, thank you, that's correct. Right, okay, so, okay, I thank you, I got it, okay. So in Uganda, driving along the roads between the rural villages in Uganda, this is, the comment was Africa is a lot of countries. I shouldn't refer to the entire continent as Africa. I stand corrected. I'll talk about Uganda. Okay, how do they make a living? With great difficulty is the answer. Here's a woman with, actually, this is real luxury. There are cows you can see perhaps in the back in the shed. Cows are a real luxury there. More common are a couple of goats or here and there, some chickens, which we'll see shortly. This gentleman here was trying to start a bakery, basically, still didn't get all the funds that he needed in order to be able to set it up the way he would like to. But most, from my understanding, here are the chickens running around. It's sustenance farming. People really grow what they need to, what they grow is what they eat. When there are droughts there, and they're very frequent, they're in desperation, desperately need assistance and help. It's really literally hand to mouth in terms of sustaining themselves in these villages. Here you can see the Kulanu is assisting through a food pantry, basically, for those who are really in desperate need. I mentioned the guest house that the earlier one. This is the guest house that the Jewish community runs. It's also not on booking.com, but I can give you the address if you're interested. And I say that actually seriously. There are many that have from the Jewish community, the American Jewish community, have come to Uganda to volunteer with the Abayudaya. There's plenty of opportunities for that. They're very much in need, whether it's teaching English or any of the other subjects in terms of assisting, as well as anything that can be taught in Judaica, synagogue skills, and so on. Preparing for Shabbat, outdoor kitchens. That's where the cooking really takes place. This Shabbat, it was particularly difficult because they had so many guests that were coming, no refrigerators. So everything has to be orchestrated and thought through in advance in different ways. Again, scenes of the women preparing for Shabbat. You don't see one here, but I had goat for the first time, which again is a rarity. For them to eat meat is something very infrequent. I mentioned before B'chol Lashon, an organization that's really dedicated to making the Jewish community more inclusive, particularly for Jews of color. They established a medical clinic in Imbala, which is right outside a couple of these villages. There's a dental clinic up on the left, and perhaps their most important aspect, or one of the main features of this clinic, is a maternity ward. If you can read it on the back of that ambulance, it says can anybody read that there? But it's the Pua and the Shifra and Pua maternity ambulance, which of course recalls the Egyptian midwives that helped the Jews give birth without casting their firstborn into the Nile, so that appreciation for the non-Jews in our community who are helpful is exemplified by this ambulance. Okay, this is very important. There was a big festival while I was there, because it was indeed the celebration, the centennial celebration of the community. These women are selling handicrafts, kippot, challah covers, and other such things that they had crocheted or weaved or embroidered. And I want to point this out as well, the Days for Girls. If you can read it from where you are, reusable sanitary pads. Again, things that we would take for granted. They are encouraging girls to make use here of sanitary pads that last for 12 months. That's the big innovation. Anybody going over to Uganda and has an empty suitcase, I can suggest what you might want to load it up with. But it's a real problem, I'm told, and again, our locals can fill us in, but I was told that in middle school and in high school, many of the girls miss a full week of school each month. They don't have any way of taking care of themselves, and rather than the embarrassment and the problems, they simply stay home. I don't know to what extent that's the case or still the case, but it's a real issue, and there are a number of initiatives there. Also for pregnancy prevention and so on. So it's an important aspect of the community. I'll just mention very quickly, the Jewish Agency does run a Tikkun Olam project called Project 10, and it brings together young Jews from Israel and around the world to do volunteering in places of need, not necessarily within Jewish communities, but this one is close to the Jewish communities that I've mentioned. And these are the volunteers who are working in the public schools there, not in the Jewish schools. We'll go back down to, whoops. So Motzei Shabbat in the community. This was the bat mitzvah party at night. You guys are going to plan one just like that here for the community next Motzei Shabbat. We were told that this doesn't happen very often, and they brought in a band and folk music and so on, largely for our benefit. But as you can see, the ones really enjoying it were not us in terms of participating. We were embarrassed, but the people there certainly were enjoying the bat mitzvah. Okay. Whoops, I didn't mean to do that again. Okay, so as I said, I was there for this centennial celebration, which was just absolutely mind-boggling. What were just empty hillsides on Shabbat were turned into a massive tent city there were a couple of thousand people there easily. They participated, many of whom I was told walked hours, up to 6 hours to get to the community. The woman on the bottom left was a minister, a cabinet minister at the time. Again, the fact that Rabbi Suzumo is was a member of parliament, really elevated the stature of the community. And there were a number of members of parliament and this minister who came and addressed the crowd. The tents just went on and on. They also brought in popular singers. You can see it just went on and on. They had thousands of people in their own big brass band. It was an amazing event, and it literally went up overnight to accommodate all these people. So again, on the one hand, you have those mud houses with dirt floors and no water and electricity, and yet at the same time, with generators and whatever, they're able to stage an event like that. I threw in, whoops. I threw in this next picture just in case some of you are curious what our ex-president did after he left the White House. You can see Obama party services there. This now is back in Kampala, the capital of Uganda. A number of the young people have established a chapter of Marom. Marom is the International Young Leadership, Young Adult Division of the conservative movement. And they've established a home for themselves in Kampala where they do study, they have services, they have cultural events, and they do Tikkun Olam social action projects within the community. You'll tell them later on, I understand that they had to move to another house, which has now been flooded, and it's a problem. I don't know the details, but the community is growing, and it's growing in age as well. There are a number of young families now with children that have established it, and it seems that there's a real future for this Jewish community, not just in the villages, but in the community, in the cities as well. Most of the young people now do go on to university, and you'll hear more about that from those who know it better than myself. You asked before, somebody asked before about getting visas for people to come. This was Jonathan and Asa, you have to look for yourselves in this picture. Gabi, my wife, and I had the pleasure of hosting a group of a Birthright Taglit group from Uganda. It also was a real story. The program was supposed to take place. It had been approved by Birthright a few months before, or several weeks before it was supposed to start. Birthright pulled their support for the program on the basis of not wanting a public spectacle of 30 some odd Abayudayans arriving in Israel and being given the same treatment as Yehuda Kimani, being held and sent back. The program, again, is only for Jews, and if Israel doesn't recognize them, it was going to be a problem. Again, as the deputy chairman of the Jewish Agency, I intervened. I arranged for an exchange of letters between Birthright and the Ministry of the Interior, which the bottom line was the Ministry of the Interior accepts that Birthright is taking its responsibility seriously to run the program as in accordance with the guidelines without being any more specific. If you bring over a group of people, we're not going to question you. So it was a tacit understanding that they would be let in under the radar, so to speak. And in fact, we were told the condition ultimately was that we would not publicize the program, we would not put it into the press, that it would be quiet, and that it would allow them to come. And indeed, they did arrive, and with the same, sorry. So they came with the same. Did you see yourselves? Were you there? Did you see your friends? Good. So now you know it's real. It's not made up. And we're now talking with Marom about bringing another group of, you probably don't know this yet, but we're hoping to bring another group of, another birthright group in the coming calendar year. And I know Gabi will be looking forward as much as I am. She did not do all the cooking, to having them again join with us. Okay, I mentioned before that I was going to continue with the stories of those who came. So let me take them one at a time. Yonatan, who had applied for that program for the young Jewish leadership when I was in Uganda and had been denied. I got in touch with the embassy there. I spoke in the name of the Jewish agency that we recognized them, that truly there was a way. They didn't need to say that they were Jewish, but they could still come as a tourist visa. We got it within 48 hours, and Yonatan was able to accompany me back on the plane to Israel. We get to passport control. I kept him with me. I didn't want a repeat of what happened with Yehuda. The person taking the passport says, you can go through. He has to go over there to that office. I said, I'm not going anywhere without him. He said, he has to be questioned. I said, what does he have to be questioned for? He said, we don't have to tell you. At that point, I pulled rank again and told them my position in the Jewish agency, that he was accompanying me, that we recognized the community. He had a visa and I expected him to be let through. We were sent into the waiting area. And I was told, well, you're going to have to wait 2 hours for the interview and we can't tell you what's going to happen after the interview. That was unacceptable. I went over to the supervisor. It took about 15 minutes and we were both let through. What would have happened if I wasn't with him? I don't know. I shouldn't have to have been there. So that's Yonatan, but he came standing with this other group of young Jewish leaders from around the world in front of the Knesset. Yehuda Kimani, perhaps the most complicated of all of them. Yosef Kabita. He's the one who applied for Aliyah while working on Kibbutz Keturah. I could give you an entire presentation just on his case. I won't. The bottom line is, after several court appearances, while he was in process of applying for Aliyah, the Supreme Court in Israel determined that a conservative or reform conversion that takes place in Israel should enable the person who's applying to make Aliyah to make Aliyah in accordance with the law of return. That was so. In his first court hearing, he was told, "Okay, we don't recognize your conversion in Uganda because there's a loophole in the law about the conversions. It says conversions are only recognized." They said it's not because it was a reform or conservative conversion, but the law states that the conversion has to take place in a recognized Jewish community. The state of Israel has to give that recognition. Since we don't recognize it, we don't care how many times you converted, because he had converted twice already in Uganda, once as a minor and once as an adult. You have to convert in a recognized Jewish community, go off to England or someplace else, convert, and then apply again, and we'll see. But in the meantime, the Supreme Court authorized conservative conversions in Israel. He immediately went through a conservative conversion in Israel, still living at Kibbutz Keturah, reapplied, and was told, didn't take enough time. You couldn't have done this you couldn't have learned everything you needed to know about Judaism in 3 months. It's not going to work. That was despite the fact that this young man had been practicing Judaism since he was born, had gone through 3 conversions at this point, was living a much more traditional life than the vast majority of Israelis. It came to the Supreme Court, and the court, these two sides, it was the minister, the state of Israel versus Yosef Kabita, right? The whole state of Israel versus this one guy. So the two sides, the judges, it was clear to us that the judges wanted to allow him to stay, but there were certain loopholes in the law which made it difficult. So basically what happened was a compromise was reached. and presented to the judge. They met in whatever during the hearings. Yosef Kabita is now on Kibbutz Keturah, given an extension to stay in Israel until his aliyah process is completed, either rejected or finalized one way or the other. And he has to convert again in 2 years from the court date, because it takes 2 years to learn everything you need to know about Judaism. So it's nonsense. As you can see, he's happily reading Torah. Kibbutz Torah is welcoming there, and he's really part and parcel of the community. Next, we have. Let's see. Okay, Rivka and Rabin. We finally got both of them into Israel as well. Long-term program at the conservative yeshiva. They were actually in love beforehand, but decided before they went back to Uganda that they would get married. That's in my conservative synagogue in Talpiot Mizrach. Rabbi Andy Sachs officiated at the wedding, a real festive event, and they got married. And this was long enough ago for me to show you as well that they now have another little member of the Abayudaya community. I just spoke with Rabin a few days ago. He's now planning on coming back for a new program at the conservative yeshiva, a 5-year rabbinical program, and he hopes to become a rabbi as well and to go back and to serve the community. Who do we have up there? Yehuda Kimani. After he was deported, we brought it to the Knesset Aliyah Committee. The Aliyah Committee summoned the head of the population ministry, the population authority and the Ministry of Immigration. And the bottom line is he was really called to task for having rejected this person with no valid reason, and we're instructed, to the extent that the Knesset can instruct him, to allow him to enter, to ensure that he would be allowed to enter the country when he reapplied for a visa. He's now back in Kenya with a growing community, as I said, affiliated with the Abayudaya. And last, Sarah, also, we ended up having to put down a bank deposit to ensure that if she came on this program and stayed on past the end of she was on the Minister of Foreign Affairs program, that if she were to stay on for the holidays afterwards, we had to, I think, give 30,000 or 50,000 shekel bank guarantee that she would leave or the deposit would be forfeited. And a women's seminary where she was going to be spending the holidays had to attest to the fact that they would take care of all of her expenses and supervise her being there, and that we all promised that we would get her out of the country as soon as possible. But these happier endings to the stories that I began telling you at the beginning, indeed shows that Hatikva, that's again Hatikva on the wall, that the hope has not been extinguished despite the rebuffs and so on. The community remains very connected to Israel and desirous of recognition. And here, if I've already mentioned Hatikva, this is that same birthright group that was in our backyard, up on Har Herzl. Okay, so I don't know how many of you can identify it, but they are singing Hatikva right opposite Herzl's grave. And of course, as you know, Herzl at one point had suggested that the Jewish state be in Uganda. So for me, this scene was very emotional and closing a circle of sorts. If you can't bring the Jews to Uganda, bring the Ugandan Jews to Israel. The Hatikva is strong. As you can see, they all know the words. And I've heard Hatikva sung 1,000 times, but I think one of the more emotional renditions of it was with this group that we worked so hard to bring in to Israel, and to see despite all the things that they've had to go through, just how connected they are. So we're really going to end with this. As I said, how goodly are they tents, O Jacob, thy dwelling places, O Israel. It has more to do, I think, with godliness than with goodliness. And in spite of everything, one feels these things. I'll only end by saying, when I came back to Israel from this trip, it was a week before the Pasha with Balak and Baram, where Baram is supposed to be cursing the Jews. And no matter how hard he tried and how much he would be rewarded for cursing them, looking out on their tents, said this, Ma tovu alecha Yaakov, Mishkenotecha Yisrael. And I can only hope, you asked before about the new government, I can only hope that the incoming government, there will be ministers and members of Knesset that looking out upon the Ugandan Jewish community of Abayudaya will feel themselves, in spite of themselves, blessing the community with these words.
So we are going to have time for some questions and some other, we have about a half an hour or so, but I wanted to say a few things. First of all, if you were at Hebrew High School this last week, Yonatan and Isa taught Hine Matov in Ugandan, right, in the local language. And I think that they may do so as well next Shabbat. So this is really about history and what's going on in the world right now. And it's so amazing to have Dr. Breakstone, who was in his role at the Sochnut, at the Jewish Agency, responsible for these emerging Jewish communities around the world. You're also responsible for my Zionism, so thank you. But so next week, this is the first. And this lecture today is in our series of learning about world Jewry. Last year, we had a lecture from Rabbi Geza Erderberg, also one of your communities in Berlin. Also, we had a lecture with Rabbi Michael Schudrick, Chief Rabbi of Poland. And so we'll continue to learn about Jewish communities around the world. It's so interesting to think of Europe as an emerging Jewish community, but post-Holocaust, post-Shoah, the communities in Europe are emerging Jewish communities. We think about this on Wednesday night. We talked with our 11th and 12th graders about the phrase, all of Israel is responsible for one another. Kol Yisrael arevim ze bazeh. And how we put into practice, and how the Jewish Agency, the non-governmental part of the Jewish world, the Jewish Agency, where some of our tzedakah money from our federation donations goes to, how you guys, the Jewish Agency, when you were there, provides a framework for having all of Jews be responsible for one another and connected. This coming Shabbat, you will joyously not be listening to me do a sermon, but instead, Yonatan and Esav will be sharing parts of their personal story and why they're here, what brought them to our community, stuff about their Jewish identity, their political action. Maybe we'll learn some singing. So I'm going to turn it back over to all of you for questions. But I also want to say that if you could, I'd love you to share one word about your current project. In addition to, David mentioned Herzl. If you go to Mount Herzl, and you go to the fabulous Herzl Museum, which is an interactive museum on Mount Herzl, the burial place of the great heroes of the Jewish state. And there's a museum there, and David created that museum. That was his work. And so there was a before he was at the Jewish Agency, and there's an after. And right now he is the executive director of the Yitzchak Navon Center for Shared Society. So I would love everyone to ask you questions, but I'd love if you could give us 2 minutes
let's take the questions first and
But you'll make sure you
but
tell
I'll
us.
somehow work that in.
Next question.
But even before questions, Jonathan Esso, was there anything that I said glaringly, that you need? I've never given this talk in front of,
So Edna, I'll let you call yourself, but say your name, Edna.
I wonder, besides political complexity and different background sources, if you find there was any connection between the Abayudaya and the Ethiopian Jews in Ethiopia, culturally, what's going on?
okay, the question is if we make any connection between the Abayudaya community and the Ethiopian Jewish community. I think I'll answer that with the comment that was made before. Africa is a lot of different countries. And I think really other than the skin color, there's no particular connection between the Jews of Uganda and the Jews of Ethiopia. The Jews of Ethiopia claim biblical ancestry, that it's been forever, whereas the Uganda community is only 100 years old. And I'm not aware of any cultural interface there that would make it any more logical to connect the community of Uganda with the community of Ethiopia as opposed to the Jews of Poland or someplace else. No. There's really, I'm a member of the directorate of the Ethiopian National Project, and it has its own issues. And there's really the only thing that they would have in common is the prejudice and the racism, but there aren't any Ugandans in Israel. They're all whisked out. I think Yosef Kabita is the only Ugandan, well, probably the only one in Israel at the moment. So there's no community there to interact with. Please. Okay, the question was how much anti-Semitism the Abayudaya community experiences today, I guess, really. And that's a question I'd have to turn over to the two of you. You can come up and you can both come up and join me on there may be more questions that.
Thank you very much, Doctor. On the question of anti-Semitism, I would say the cases are very minimal, given what has transpired in the community. First of all, Doctor talked about our rabbi being voted into parliament. Given the population of the Abayudaya ratio to other Jews, to other people in the country, we are very small. So if they entrusted us with that big position, that means anti-Semitism is very limited, though not rule it out, because there have been cases of mocking the Abayudaya, like you killed Jesus, all that sorts of kind of mocking and insults, but it's not as effective as I would say maybe in other parts where Jewish people live.
You want to add to that or? Okay, next, please.
The immigration applications and all the applications to have an anti-Semitic undertone from Israel?
No, I would say it's quite the opposite in a perverted kind of way. It's not anti-Semitism, it's racism. I hate to say, okay, I hate to say it so bluntly, but I feel that I can say that because President Yitzhak Bougie Herzog has stated outright, particularly when he was head of the Jewish Agency, that the rejection of the Abayudaya and the Ethiopians is racism, and it's hard to say that, but that's the feeling that's there. I want to say, though, in that context, both with the stories, it was important for me to end with the positive aspect of it, and it's important for me to let you know that there are, politicians aside, that there are so many of us in Israel that are welcoming of the community and that are disturbed, including judges on the courts and people in the Knesset who made effort to overturn these things, of really being much more inclusive. And here's a good, I'll put in a one sentence or so about the Navon Center for a Shared Society. That's being established without going into any detail. Yitzhak Navon was the 5th president of the state of Israel. He believes very much in making Israel an inclusive, shared society where everybody, not just Jews of different colors and traditions and backgrounds, Ashkenazi, Sephardi, Mizrahi, and so on, but also Arabs and Druze as well, should all feel that they belong equally to the state of Israel and have a responsibility for its future. And I'll add as well, I think that applies, allow me to say, applies to you as well, that we're all stakeholders in Israel's future. And if there are things that I shared here that we find disturbing, now is not the time to say, okay, that's what Israel wants. Let them be that way. It's not our business. It is your business. And I certainly encourage you at this time to, in any way possible, to continue trying to impact on Israel, to make sure that it becomes the kind of society that Yitzhak Navon really envisioned, that Theodore Herzl certainly envisioned, really of an exemplary society. Herzl already had an Arab minister in his government, way back in his imaginary government of the Jewish state he thought would come into being. Navon worked very hard with all of the communities, and there are certainly many of us in Israel who are struggling very hard to make sure that we're on the right path. Yes, please. Okay, I see that slide is no longer up there. I'm not sure what happened to it. Yeah. Okay, so I have this last slide up here about Kulanu, the organization that I mentioned, and they've invested close to $1 million, or will have over the last 15 years or so. In a major part is the Jewish school. There's also a Jewish high school that I didn't show you. They've given mini grants to try to allow people to create, like that bakery in the making that you saw, religious needs of both helping to build synagogues and send over religious articles, Sifrei Torah and Talitot, Tefillin, Sidurim, and so on. Nutritional security, there have been a number of attempts, there's one going on now, of really creating sustainable agricultural efforts, and are investing in those who are now working with different organizations and with outside advisors, so that they can become something a bit more than sustenance farming, not just to take care of their own immediate family needs, but really to try to create something that would go beyond that. Infrastructure, you saw that mikveh in the making, but they're also working on generators and things like that. And I'll just mention that Kulanu is working in this area with more than 50 such communities around the world in 33 different countries on 5 continents doing this kind of work. So there are those who are making that effort.
Before people have to walk out, I know there are a few more questions. We will get them. We're going to go to Suzanne first, because I know she's monitoring the Zoom. David, thank you so much for being here. If you come on our Israel trip from our congregation, God willing, in June, at the end, last 2 weeks of June, I am certain that we will
all be in my backyard eating dinner if you promise to sing as enthusiastic
David
as the
and Gabby's-
birthright Abayudaya.
I got you. I see you. So we want to thank you. We also want to again say that next Shabbos morning, please come. The sermon slot is there. So that's if you're just coming for that, that's okay. Although come to our joyous davening, but if you come for that to hear Yonatan and Isa, that's around 11:15. And then also at lunch, Sunday morning, Minyan is at 9, at 10 a.m. 10 is our, yeah, at 10 a.m. is our mid-year congregational meeting. So I'm looking forward to that. And then 11 to 2, we have a craft fair. And it is really, today was the first day that we successfully had an in-person minyan since COVID. There were more than 10 people in person. So that's exciting. We look forward to that next week. Also, how do you say Hine Matov in Uganda? Lava. How do you say it?
Lava we kulyo kurunji we kusanyusa abo Uganda okutula.
So come next week.
The one big disappointment I had in the synagogues in Uganda was that they have adopted our Western melodies instead of continuing to use only their own. But
So Suzanne's going to be first because she has from the Zoom, and then there's one over here and one over here for questions. You can stay as long as we can. Suzanne.
okay, thank you. Good question. I mentioned Kulanu. There is another organization, a grassroots organization. The question was about the work of Achva, what Achva has done in terms of facilitating help assistance for the Ugandans that are the Abayudayans that are trying to get into Israel programs. There is a grassroots organization that runs the whole gamut from secular, proudly secular to proudly Orthodox, a group of people that have been petitioning the Jewish Agency and the government of Israel and trying to facilitate with funding as well to enable more and more Abayudayans to visit Israel and hopefully encouraging the state of Israel to recognize the community. Other questions from the Zoom? Okay, somebody over here had wanted, yes, please. Thank you for that comment. There have been talk from time to time of trying to create some sort of educational program that could be brought into the Hebrew schools, the Jewish schools, and so on. If I'm not mistaken, I think Shoshana has just published a children's book. Yes. So one of the members of the community who's now studying at HUC for the rabbinate has just published a book. We'll make sure that Rabbi Mero gets aware of it. And perhaps there can be really an initiative to get, it's a children's book about the community. So it would be perfect for Hebrew schools and Jewish day schools and so on. And if you guys are stuck in America for a while longer, you can put together a whole educational kit for using in the school. But it's I think a very important point. I will take it to heart, and we will see if we can try to figure out how to put together some sort of educational program that schools would be able to use. Thank you. So there are two who have applied. One is Joseph, who is on the Kibbutz Keturah, and the other is Rivka, who is now back in Uganda together with her husband. As I mentioned, Rabin wants to come back to Israel next year already to study in a 5-year rabbinic program. The danger of that is he'll end up staying and they won't have another rabbi that they need back in Uganda. But Rivka did apply for Aliyah. This is an interesting question. If the doors were open, I'll give you the answer that Rabbi Sizomo gave me, and then you can give your answer. I asked him why, unlike from Ethiopia, why everybody isn't applying to make Aliyah. We saw the conditions they're living in. And his answer was, David, if they're hungry here, they can go out and pick a mango. What are they going to do in Israel? They don't have the wherewithal and the education, the older people, to make Aliyah. It's just so different culturally and technologically and educationally. They would just have too hard a time. But in terms of the young people in particular, if the doors of Israel were open to Aliyah, what do you think would happen?
Thank you. This question has come across many younger people from our community. If that opportunity comes in, from some people of my age whom I've interacted with and who have been asked that question, some say like any other kid from the world who, when they reach the age of 18 and they would love to serve in IDF. Also, some of them say I would love to do that sacrifice for Israel and come back home and stay. Others would want to stay there, but others want to stay home and build their community and make sure the community grows. Because given our history, as Dr. said, of Idi Amin, the community was disintegrated. So everyone would love to stay home and build the community. However, with a good relationship and connection to Israel, like if there's an opportunity to go and study, you go and study and come back home.
I think that's a very important insight into the community, that they're very proud. Please.
Also, as sorry, I can just grab it. Also, as a Jewish person, we always get inspired by other religions. I would say the Christians or the Muslims who have their homes away from home. Just like Muslims has Saudi Arabia as their other home, Christians go to Roma as their other home. We, the Jewish people, also would feel very proud to call Israel our second home, even when we don't live there, but we have freedom and to go there for a visit or do anything and then come back at any time that we want, which is not the case right now. Even when you're going on a tourist visa, you are denied access to enter Israel. And also, like I would say, our community is not that like a financial community that can help the Israel as a country to support in any way or the other. Many people wanted to support the Israel community through serving in the IDF, but still we are not given that opportunity to support our second home. So that's why we feel like very, very bad being rejected in that way.
Thank you. So as I was saying, I think that's a very important insight into the community, that despite the difficult conditions that they're facing, there's a great deal of pride in creating their own local Jewish community. And just as we don't expect, even if I would like it, to see more people coming on Aliyah, There's the connection to the community, but the idea here of coming to serve in the Israel Defense Forces as a way of expressing that support, even if it's not financial, so much more than financial, is very strong. Maybe we have time for no more questions, but we'll take another. Please. Oh, hi, I didn't, come up and. I apologize in the midst, out of context.
Right. Hi, I'm Molly Levine. I'm the executive director of Kulanu. So David is on our board. So
First time we're
yes,
meeting
we're finally meeting face to face. Right.
Zoom for 2 years.
Right.
I didn't
In
recognize
3D.
you without a screen.
Right. I should have come on my screen. Right. So yeah, so it's really great to meet David in person and hear about the Abayudaya.
Anything you want to add about Kulanu that I didn't? I was very brief, but
No, you gave a great overview. I was really impressed with all the different things that you mentioned we do. It's really hard to put it all succinctly because Kulanu works in so many different places, so many different communities.
But if you asked before about what you could do to be of help about this, besides education, anybody who is, after this presentation feels that they would like to get involved, Kulanu is very open to volunteers in all sorts of capacities. So I don't know, Molly, I had the address up there, but it's pretty easy, right?
Yeah, so you can reach out to me directly at molly@kulanu.org, KULANY@KULANU.org.
So
And any questions
there
after?
definitely are ways to be of concrete help right now. And for people who just want to learn for themselves, as I mentioned, over 50 communities around the world in 33 countries, most of which my guess is you've never heard of. I know I certainly didn't until I joined the Kulanu board. And it's a fascinating story of a Jewish people, very different than what we grow up knowing.